Welcome to Life on Purpose, where we talk all things health, wellness, and living your life on your terms. I'm your host, Brandy Eilert. I'm a holistic health and wellness coach and creator of Brandy Eilert Wellness, where I help women with adrenal fatigue and chronic stress live a more holistic, purpose-filled life. You can find my content and services at wellness360coach.com/Brandy-Eilert. You can also find me at Brandy Eilert Holistic Wellness Coach on Facebook or Brandy Eilert Wellness Coach on Instagram. Now get ready to learn how to really live life on purpose. Death. An inevitable part of existing on this planet. It is assured for all of us. But so many of us refuse to accept the possibility, refuse to even examine what it means for us, what it means for our loved ones, what it means at all. We forget that it's a part of the natural process. We only talk about it in terms of its tragedy or its unfairness, never daring to examine its deeper meaning, the bigger picture. I'm a bigger picture kind of person. I always have been. When it comes to these bigger, heavier issues, I often find myself quietly thinking, there's something more. What's the bigger picture here? So I wanted to examine this topic. It's not a pleasant one. It's not something any of us really wants to examine in depth. However, as in the bigger questions we ask ourselves about life and its meaning and larger purpose, wouldn't we be remiss not to also examine its end as well? Our feelings around our own mortality and the mortality of those we love. This year has been filled with it. It's in our faces all the time. I often ask myself if the concept of death would be less terrifying if I became more aware and accepting of my own mortality and the mortality of my loved ones. For me personally, I was never all that scared of my own death until I became a parent. Then I realized what a control freak I am and not wanting to leave my children to be raised by anybody but me. The fear of my own mortality actually had nothing at all to do with myself, but with those around me. It was a really interesting revelation. And to dig further into these feelings, I also had terror around the mortality of those I love and how I would live without them if they were to pass away. What it all boiled down to is fear of feeling these intense emotions of loss of connection, the feelings of being gypped out of sharing the experience of life with those I love, with those I care about, with those I connect with. You often hear people say life and death as if they're opposites. That is in fact not the case. Birth is the opposite of death. Life has no opposite. You have a brief window of time, some more brief than others, to experience this planet, its human connections, its wonders, its tragedies, its triumphs, its natural order. I heard this monologue on the show, The Walking Dead World Beyond, that really struck me as I was preparing for today's guest. And it went like this. What is the strongest force in the world? If you were a layperson, you might say gravity. If you were a high school student, you might say electromagnetism. If you were a physicist, you might say nuclear. But they would all be wrong, because the strongest force in the world is the force of nature. Nature contains us all. We are nature. Cogs in a massive machine playing our part. Playing more than our part. We as a race think we can escape its pronouncements, skirt its rulings, sneak past its guards. It gives no consideration to wants or needs, feelings or sentiment. We think we can steal from it and come away with its bounty without consequence, but it contains us from our beginning to our end. The biological imperative that all organisms must survive to seek food, water, shelter, to procreate is the only reasonable offset to the crushing power of nature. Yet even with our resolute will to survive, nature will end us, because that is its law. Death, inevitable. Extinction, just another of its rules, another part of the life cycle of the very old world churning with energy. There is no escape from the inescapable. There is no respite from the unceasing. It makes its choices for us. In short, accept the wind. It always wins. In short, we know our time is limited. We know that not a single one of us will get out of here alive. Why fear the inevitable? That brief, sometimes too brief, in between, the dash between your birth date and your death date, is what you make of it. Think about the perception we create around death when all we see on the news each and every day for nearly a year straight is a death ticker on the screen. It's tallied daily on nearly every news channel. This constant, in-your-face reminder of mortality can create this intense fear, so much so that it infringes upon one's ability to truly experience life. And although there are these things to fear in this life, things to be cautious of, things to avoid to extend that dash, be sure you don't become paralyzed by it. Don't get stuck in that fear. Live. So today I want to reintroduce you to the guest, the interview that you're going to hear today, Dr. Heather George. Dr. G was first on the podcast in episode 10 with a fantastic conversation about Oriental medicine, the mind-body connection, the physical-spiritual connection as it relates to overall health. Not only is Dr. G a doctor of Oriental medicine, she is also the spiritual leader and director of the Lotus Way. She's a healer in every sense of the word. She attends beginning and end of life events and everything in between. Her unique perspective on this topic is exactly why, when I was exploring this idea, the idea of how our perspective on mortality and death can affect how we live our lives, as a potential episode, she was who I wanted to talk to again. So I asked her and she accepted, and I'm so pleased to once again bring you Dr. Heather George. Dr. G, welcome back. I'm glad we could make this work again. We had a little bit of a technical issue yesterday, but we're all good now, and I'm glad that you're here to have this conversation that's both difficult, I think, because most people avoid talking about the subject of death and dying and vitality and all of that. So you said something to me in our very first interview, and it was about the importance of not only living vitally, but dying vitally. And that got me to thinking, A, what exactly does that mean? And B, in the state of the world as it is right now, how can anybody wrap their mind around that?
It's a beautiful question, Brandy. And, the word vitally is an interesting word, especially when we pair it with the word dying.
Right. It's almost counterintuitive.
For a lot of us, it's counterintuitive. How can we die vitally? And certainly every single one of us can imagine a scenario of dying where that seems impossible. A young child, or a person in a acute trauma, like a car crash, or someone who's not been practicing the kinds of things I've practiced for decades now. Certainly it would be hard to understand in these different scenarios that maybe we can talk about. But well, let's just keep it simple right now to say that vitality and concepts like approaching something with total awareness, and at some point acknowledging that the emotions around an experience are mutable and can change and shift the experience, especially when we don't get too trapped in any one emotion. So awareness allows us to have a more objective view of the emotional experience we have around life and death. If that doesn't make sense, an example might be, let's take something, instead of something potentially scary that we resist, like death, to a really great experience. I just won the lottery, $1 million. Right now, if I said that to any of you, you'd have a lot of emotions come up. And there's a, in that right moment, those hormones flood us that are attached to those moments, and adrenaline and oxytocin, and we're flooded with all this stuff. Another part of me, us yogis can say, we have another experience going on because we practice non-attachment. We practice stepping outside of ourselves and the present human experience with all the emotions, and see this bigger picture and go, wow, okay, this is happening right now. And there's a calmness, there's a steadiness, whether it's $100 million or I just lost everything. I can have a conscious, aware experience of what I'm going through beyond the emotional experience I'm having. And vitality comes when we can make decisions from that whole perspective. I just won $1 million. I'm really happy. This is exciting. And okay, I'm the same person I was yesterday, really, as I'm going to be tomorrow as a newly minted millionaire. There's a part of life that's bigger than that one moment and that experience. And I can hold that. And we can do the same thing around death, whatever the case, holding. I don't have children, but I have counseled people who've held their children in their arms while that child is dying.
Right. And I was just thinking that, because I've had actually very dear friends of ours who went through that process of, watching their toddler go through brain cancer, and then a very, very short illness, and then holding him as he passed away. How does somebody like that, how can they, a parent watching their child, their little child, pass away and pass on from this world, how can somebody like that be able to separate that emotion?
We're jumping right in at the beginning of this interview to kind of the hardest aspects of the topic that you invited me on to discuss. So I commend you on that, and B, I want to acknowledge right now that anyone listening to this that might have had or be having or in the future have experiences that these concepts we're talking about seem impossible. They are the hardest concepts, and we're jumping right into them. And that alone is going to bring up a lot of emotion for me. It does, because I care so much about the people that I support with the kind of things that you just spoke about. And I do not want to minimize the unimaginable challenge, especially for people who do not have the kind of support and practitioners or practices to help hold them in the space that you and I are talking about right now. So I just want to let all of you know I'm sensitive to that. But to answer your question.
Right. And I want, before you kind of jump in, I also want the audience to be aware that you actually attend people's passing on. You've attended deaths, you've attended births. Like, you have this perspective of life and death that most of us will not be able to experience, which is, again, why I wanted not only to get your perspective on this, but because you have this kind of experience of ushering in life and ushering it out.
The most sacred parts of my practices, both as a spiritual practitioner, as our 501c3, the Lotus Way, and the way I've helped marry people. I have held people in their last breaths. I've held the hands of the support and caregivers and family members as they held the hand of their loved one through last breath. I've officiated memorial services. I've also had the pleasure of seeing miracle healings, and people come off of death's door.
Yeah.
And other people who thought that was going to happen, and they brought me in hoping I was going to help be that miracle. And I was not. I didn't, no one could save them. And so then we had to deal with letting go.
Right.
This is the most precious work of a spiritual practitioner and a healer, of which I'm both. And my healing practices are East Asian medicine based. That's, my master's and doctoral degrees, my other degrees in education. So, being able to help people and teach people and hold people in these precious times is a huge part of my life. And I certainly also have colleagues who do death care full time. And that is,
Yeah.
it's just a part of my practice. But thank you for that. And so as we get back to your question, and, just hope people hear that I really understand the sensitivity around the topic we're talking about as we just go, and so like die vitally.
Right. Easier said than done, I think.
I and many who deal with this stuff, we have practices, for me, decades of practices around the concepts we're just chatting about today.
Yeah.
Ideally we get to work with people while they're, you said, and you used words I've said, live vitally and die vitally.
Yeah.
The ideal is preventative medicine, right? So while people are working on living vitally, they come to me. So then we have tools for the dying vitally part. That often doesn't get to happen. I get called in when things go wrong, right?
Unfortunately.
Not always preventative. A lot of times people are already, and they haven't developed the practices, read the books, received support from me until someone says, oh, you're at death's door or holding someone at death's door, call Dr. George.
Yeah.
And so wherever people are in this process, and like we'll come back to the example of a parent holding their child through death. How does that parent or that child who's really barely cognitively developed enough to understand the concept of what's going on to them, a 2-year-old child, and a parent of a 2-year-old child, how do we bring vitality into a concept like that? That seems counterintuitive, like you said, crazy. However, what are the choices? And we do have choices. And one choice we have, and especially for people who don't currently have support systems or understandings of these practices or anything, is to bring in professionals who do, to help you in those times, to make those experiences, however unbelievably difficult, seemingly impossible they do happen. Children die.
Yeah.
It happens. We try and make it not happen. A lot of us dedicate a lot of our lives to helping people avoid that, but it's sometimes unavoidable. So if literally, God forbid, it does happen, and it does because it's nature and it happens, how can we bring some vitality into that kind of experience? And it's possible. I've seen it happen. Now, your question is how?
Right. How do you make sense of that? I think as a parent having 3 little ones, your natural reaction is how will I ever make sense of this? And it didn't even happen to me. It could happen to me, and I'm very aware that it could happen to me. How do you make sense of something like that?
The only answer, because if we try and make sense of things like this through our brain only, it will never happen.
Yeah.
It will never happen if we just only try and put a cerebral puzzle together of why is this happening? How could this happen? For people who do have a faith, how could God let this happen? Is a big question,
Yeah.
or what did I do wrong? One of the big ways to answer you is look at nature. The answer is it can happen because it has always happened in nature. It will always happen in nature to some living beings. Will not live a totally healthy life to old age and die peacefully in their sleep. The percentage of living beings that are blessed in some ways, and let's not say they're the only ones that are blessed, because that's not true, but maybe if we all got to choose how we were going to die or how our children were going to die, they'd live a long, healthy, happy life and die peacefully in their sleep in their old age.
Right. I think if you ask anybody what their ideal death is, it's going to be either in their bed sleeping or surrounded by family at their home, at a very old age. Right. But I can think about somebody personally who lived to a very old age, was very sick at the end, was also very angry and lonely at the end. So the length of life doesn't always equate to that word vital.
And your question of how can we make sense of any death that doesn't happen like that, the best answer I've come up with is look at nature.
Mm-hmm.
We can make sense of it by knowing there's not a living a system of living beings, human or otherwise, in the history of history that they all lived that ideal and died that ideal way.
Right.
A huge percentage of every living being in any system dies differently than that ideal way. That's nature. That's always been nature. That will always be nature. Science is helping us, not only us, but other species. There are scientists who dedicate their lives to helping bald eagles live longer, healthier lives in nature and die less tragically. Fish in the sea, trees.
Right.
I mean, we have, science has helped us live longer, more vital lives in many ways. That's amazing. But science has not figured out how to have every single one of us live forever and die peacefully.
Because we're all very biologically
right.
individual,
So,
very biologically different.
And so even though, and we're talking, as we talk right now, even though our brains hear what I'm saying right now and go, okay, we still biologically will, in order to have the drive to survive, resist death to some extent. And any healthy being is working on living vitally.
Right. And you could argue that if you're living vitally, you're also dying vitally, because as we're living, we are nobody's getting out of this. We are all in the process of getting to the end, yet we are avoiding thinking about the end.
And Brandy, you just stole my punchline that I was slowly working us to. Good job.
Sorry.
How do you die vitally? What's the answer? You just said it.
You live vitally.
You live vitally. You live vitally. And what was, when we first started talking, what was the word I used? You have to have you develop a awareness that goes beyond the moment's emotions. You validate the moment's emotions, whether they're joy or deep grief. That you are aware. We all can be aware that those emotions are temporal, circumstantial, natural. And then we focus on the living part. Wherever we are on the food chain of life to death, the part that we can focus on is the breath and the life, if it's still in us. How can we breathe more consciously, live more consciously, even if it's our last breath, even if we don't know what's coming next, even if we're in an ecstatic state of joy and a boulder falls on us, or even if we are in a horrible place in our lives, but we're pretty sure there's going to be a next day.
Yeah.
So these extremes of every circumstance, whether you're a mother of a very sick child, whether you were feeling great today and now all of a sudden you have gotten sick with something that, is really scary. Whatever the circumstances, if we focus on, first of all, allowing whatever emotions come up with whatever experience we're having, then remembering that those emotions are temporal, natural, and we can do something with them. We can step outside of them, part of us, and have a more holistic, aware experience. And from that place, and this is yoga, right? This is a long story short, some people call this yoga. It's developing a connection to the mind, the body, and breath, allowing them to flow and move, feeling as connected as we can in a moment to whatever experience we're having, And then that experience is gone and we're in the next moment. And then we do the same thing.
It's really interesting you say that, because I had, and you were actually there for this personal experience of mine during a yoga nidra, where I don't think I've ever really been able to release emotion like I have during a yoga practice. I don't think I realize how much I hold on to things. And so I can attest to what you're saying of, having this practice and being able to release these emotions that for me came out as tears. Like, I didn't even know what was happening, and I didn't know what I was feeling, but they were coming out. And
It was beautiful. And of all the, I mean, I've taught hundreds and hundreds of yoga nidra classes to individuals and to groups, so thousands of people over
mm-hmm.
decades. And I, granted yours was fairly recently, but you're talking about, but I can still remember, like, and I don't have a great memory, but I can tell you in these practices, and yours was on your birthday, and you laid
Yes.
down, and, an hour later sat up, and you had not expected the experience that you had. I cannot count how many times I have been blessed to hold the space for people that had that, whatever it was. Some of them, they came out having these very deep, tears. Others had rainbows shooting out of their bodies. Others had messages come in clear as day on a lifelong challenge they didn't even think they were going to lay down for the practice to be working on. Right. So many things can happen, which is why I offer that kind of treatment. And yoga nidra during the death process, for either people who are dying,
Mm-hmm.
actively, hopefully consciously going into the death process, if we can help it, and the people supporting them, if we can lay them down and support their practices, a magical moment for that kind of, as you're calling it, yoga practice.
Yeah.
And I call it a yoga practice, but there's meditation, there's a lot of different practices that can be done, but they all do connect the mind, the body, and the breath, and the spirit.
Right.
And the word spirit, however loaded that is, just that aspect of us and the world and the things going on that are immeasurable and yet to be totally able to be defined and explainable, yet we all feel it. Just like
Right.
we feel love. We can't measure love yet, but we sure all believe that love exists. So we use the word spirit to cover a whole myriad of energetic things that we know are real, that we just can't touch and feel.
Can't touch.
And around death, there's a lot of that. No matter how much science has figured out, there's still a whole lot of that amazing, mysterious energy that surrounds those experiences. And many people who aren't real big on spirituality, it's on death's door that they feel it and find it.
And that was going to be my next question. How important is it to have some sort of spiritual practice, whether it's, a religious practice or something, more on the spiritual side with yoga or whatever it may be, whatever it is for you? How important is it to have some sort of spirituality that connects you and how you feel about either yourself passing on or somebody close to you passing on?
This is an area that obviously anyone who listens to this, if you don't know this about me right up front, I'm extremely biased in this uh,
Area. Yeah. Yeah.
area. So obviously for me, I have, through my life's experiences, come to the conclusion that that is one of the most important things to incorporate into our lives, no matter who you are, how old you are, what demographics you identify with on any level, whether it's religion or the color of the pigment of your skin or gender, or
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. I have found that through my personal experiences and observations of every other single human being on this planet that I have ever seen or known or studied about, that when they embrace a more holistic perspective about life that includes the numinous, another word would be spiritual. It certainly does not have to be religious, but certainly some or many religions, I think, do qualify and help people in this regard. Other people who are not religious that still embrace this numinous, immeasurable, undefinable aspect of all reality. Some of the most hardcore scientists end up at this because they are spent their whole lives trying to measure and define and understand everything, and they get to points. Physicists are my favorite in this department, who realize there are just things that we have not yet been able to, and probably in the foreseeable future cannot measure, that exist.
Or even explain.
And so that stuff, whatever you want to call it, to acknowledge it and to embrace an aspect of it in everything we do, living, dying, and every other little experience in between. If we don't not only acknowledge it, but probably develop some type of framework to contemplate it and experience it and potentially be able to express it and have discussions around it. I think the people who resist that, bringing that into their lives, are the people that I see struggling the most on levels that make living and dying vitally possible. So when I talk about my practices really helping people live vitally and die vitally, that aspect, embracing the physical realities. I'm a hardcore physicalist too. I believe in physical medicine, hard science. I love that stuff. I mean, last night I had 3 heavy science magazines beside my bed. None of them were fluffy, woo-woo, spiritual, nothing. I'm reading about physics. I'm reading about computer technology, nanotechnology, particle, mRNA, medical treatments, which is a whole new thing in the world. I'm fascinated by that stuff and not against it in totality ever. And if we don't allow this other aspect in, you just lose a huge part of the picture.
Right. So you're not seeing the whole picture. You're not seeing the other
part of the picture we can't see.
Right. Or measure
and yet it's still there. And so to deny it and dismiss it, to me, and I don't want to speak badly about people, because I think there's still an aspect of me who denies and dismisses things that I can't see, touch, feel, or understand. Mm-hmm. We all have this nature. However, to not acknowledge it or to criticize another person for attempting to explore that through whatever models they find, a big one is Christianity, another big one is Judaism, another not so big one, Sufism, or, I could name any, either religion or spiritual perspective, Buddhism, that explore these things. To dismiss or deny the people who are simply just trying to find a model to explore this part that we really, none of us can deny.
Well, and I think we're all just trying to use these tools to make sense. Life and death make sense.
And I go back to, so when we talk about living and dying vitally, all we're doing is trying to make sense beyond what our brains can make sense of. If we just operate from just here, and when I point to my brain, I just mean we run it through our monkey mind, and if the puzzle pieces don't all fit together, it drives us crazy. So our monkey mind keeps grappling. How could a 2.5-year-old, sweet, perfectly happy, healthy child have to go through this, and how can I not do anything to save them? So whether it's the doctor trying to save that child's life, or the mother not wanting to let go of the baby, or the baby suffering and being in pain, and not being able to make sense of this, if we get stuck in that part, which I'm not saying isn't a part of it, but if we only live from that cerebral place, we will never be able to make sense, certainly not of a lot of death. And honestly, we will not be able to fully embrace a lot of what's going on in life.
Right. And there's a lot going on in life now. And I think that's another reason I really wanted to have this conversation too, because it seems like this overarching theme this year, this overarching fear of death and dying, and especially as it relates to disease. I have something here that I wanted to read to you because I kind of wanted to transition into this idea that how our fear of disease affects how we live or choose not to live. And I don't know, I think I asked you this before, if you were familiar with Dr. Zach Bush. He put something out the other day that really, really struck me, and I wanted to make sure that I brought it up in this conversation. It's a little bit of a longer monologue, but I'll try to make it brief. He said, as humans, we have an intuitive sense of what we should and shouldn't do. It's not in our physiology or intuitive awareness to wake up in the morning and say, I'd love some chemotherapy today. Or, what a day for a statin drug to shut down the primary metabolic anti-inflammatory capacity of my liver. Or, today is a beautiful day to inject a mix of chemicals, foreign genetic material, and toxic metals into my arm to disrupt my innate relationship to the one with 15 zeros behind it, viral components that's in my bloodstream right now. Your body knows health, the pathways to support health, clean water, soil, food, air, sun, movement, curiosity, and sleep. So then how does the US build a $400 billion a year chemotherapy industry? By creating a narrative of biologic helplessness. No mention of the extraordinary healing and regenerative capacity of our biology. Then from there, leveraging emotions that overcome the physiologic repulsion to these chemical interventions. Fear and guilt. With cancer patients, they're scared to imagine they may die and leave behind loved ones if they don't undergo this treatment. No other options are offered. The reality is that we all will die. Biology goes through a life and death process, which is unrelated to cancer. And yet, Western medicine inserts this concept that we're all going to live until we get a life-threatening disease. The US is clearly the most fearful nation. We spent $3.7 trillion on disease management, 7 times or more as most developed nations. With only 4%, the US reports 20% of global deaths in this pandemic. We spend 4 times more money on disease care than military defense and homeland security. Disease is what we are most afraid of. So, it goes on a little longer, but it really got me to thinking how what we're being told to fear the most is getting sick. And how does that then, this fear of disease, this fear of illness, how does that then affect how we choose to live? It's a really big question, I know, and I
so you can help me keep on track as I answer, because that was a long quote. That
yes.
was, a lot. There was a lot in there. There were a lot of statistics. We could talk about a lot of things that came up. But the 2 things, so you can help me keep on track, is one, we'll come back to it, which is my personal definition, my kind of 101 about disease and dis-ease. And the other is the dance between the natural and biological healing potentials in us and the practices. And honestly, there's still human advancements, but they are more relegated to the natural healing practices compared to what Dr. Bush in that sort of is separating out from the natural biological ability to heal, and then the scientific advances that, for better and sometimes for worse, he's pointing out are healing potentials. Chemotherapy, an example that he gave. I want right now to say I'm a fan of, whenever possible, and it is hard, and I don't think he did a great job of this in that quote, not polarizing those things, not pulling them so far apart that it's an either or. You either get chemotherapy or do it naturally, and one is right and one is wrong. I don't I tend to do that as a more naturally based. I mean, I went to the National University of Natural Medicine, a
Mm-hmm.
naturopathic medical school. My doctoral degree is in East Asian medicines. That's obviously more in the, if not totally in the natural realms. But even that is not in the natural realms. You know, I'm a licensed acupuncturist. I use metal needles and stick them in people sometimes. That's not natural. That metal needle, you know, those get packaged and made in little plastic things. And so where do we draw the line? Where do we separate what's natural and not natural? And certainly we can look at these extremes and state some of the statistics Dr. Bush talked about that I don't disagree with. But if we polarize the issues too much, we lose everybody. And we lose
Right. And maybe I should have kept reading too, because I feel like he ended
I
that.
I have great respect for Dr. Bush. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't. He's a very controversial doctor.
Oh, completely.
And I'm maybe some people would consider me controversial. However, when people do consider me, I don't know, anti-vax or anti-chemotherapy, it's not true. It's not true. I am not
Anti.
anti anything
Yeah.
or pro any one thing. I am an integrative philosopher, spiritual practitioner, and physician, teacher. I believe the answers are in a more non-dualistic, less polarizing, more integrative way of looking at these things. And so with that being said, the thing I want to the gem in and my frustration that I share with Dr. Bush and with you, which is why you brought that up, is we do live in a culture that is very much more heavily weighted into the modern pharmaceutical, surgical, mechanical, technological advanced aspects of healing that are really cool, by the way. They're really some phenomenal cool stuff in those sciences. However, we have become so heavily weighted in those sciences being the kind of end all be all that is been a continually evolving progression. Honestly, all of the modern sciences still have to trace their roots back
Mm-hmm.
to something in the natural sciences. Physician, the word physician, comes from a Latin root word physicus that means things relating to nature that heal. Long story short. So most of our pharmaceuticals, for example, have derivatives that came from natural elements that we went, oh, willow bark, interesting. Willow bark seems to take away pain when you chew on it. Well, now it's become Tylenol, and we can, so with us so heavily weighted in the advanced sciences, we have pushed aside, dismissed, tucked away, called it old and antiquated or no longer relevant, all these other very deep, rich philosophies and practices and protocols and substances that I do believe, and I'm sad that I see have been so dismissed and put aside, because they, in my life and Dr. Bush's life and many scientists and people who don't get as much funding because we don't make as much money off of our ways, I think is why we don't get funding. I mean, funding is about money, and we live in a economically driven paradigm where, for better and worse, people have to make sense of a bottom dollar, right? And even I still have to pay bills. I'd love to do everything I do for free because I do this heart-centered kind of holistic natural thing, but I need people to pay me so I can pay my bills, and other people figure out how to make more money, and technology helps us make more money and maybe save more lives sometimes, so it's a dance. However, in that dance we have lost an intelligence that I think you believe, Dr. Bush believes, because we're losing this innate conscious awareness of our body's natural abilities to heal, especially if we focus on what you said: clean air, clean soil, sunshine, whole foods, these things that really do. And if you don't believe this out there and you're listening to this, I'd be shocked if people who don't believe this are still listening.
Right. Probably not.
But if you're still in there and you don't think those things are a huge part of what will help you either avoid disease or more successfully navigate any disease should it come to your door, then I do believe we're missing a huge point. So it really frustrates me when people come to me that, deep in any disease. A lot of people show up on my doorstep because none of the other doorsteps they showed up helped, and now they're really, really, and I'm like a last ditch effort. And none of their doctors until they got to me told them, oh, maybe you should stop drinking 2 liters of Coca-Cola a day and eating that really low grade meat on an almost daily basis. And, you're like more than 100 pounds overweight. And, I'm not a big person. I don't focus on weight. I focus on if you feel healthy or not, and then what we need to do. I don't care how much anybody weighs. I care how you feel. But the fact is that very few people who are carrying around a ton of weight because they do not exercise, eat poorly, all these things, that's going to cause disease. And certainly if you aren't sick and you have a lot of these factors and your diet and lifestyle is such a way, and then you do get sick, it's going to cause you to have worse symptoms. So this is just common sense. However, it's not common sense
It's
anymore.
not common sense. And I think it's my hope and my wish and my frustration that there's not more of a middle ground where both of these, strictly heavy technological scientific advances in medicine over here can meet the more holistic, natural, common sense
right. And that's
practices
what it is
over here.
But so if I had been smarter when I was younger, I would have done my MD first and then done all my other studies and training, because then I would be legitimately licensed and studied and trained to be able to be a preeminent person to be in that middle ground.
Yeah.
I did, for better or worse, and honestly it was because I was healing myself in those years. I had about 5 different debilitating diseases, and I was focused on dealing with those while I was studying and going to every single type of doctor I possibly could. And for me, swinging into that natural world was in the end what saved my life, what ended my chronic debilitating pains, what got me on a track. And so that's the area I ended up going into. I have tremendous respect for people in the more modern conventional sciences. That just the reality is that those don't answer all the questions for all the people all the time, and there were fewer people in this other world, and that's the world I went into. And gosh, I wish we could dance together more. I really wish we could be more balanced.
I do as well. I mean, it was those 2 practices that I pieced together myself, practitioners on both ends of the spectrum that really got me to where I needed to be.
And my favorite patients, I have a lot. You're all my favorite patients. Everybody that's a patient student of mine is my favorite. It really is true. Everybody's so unique and special, but I get a real kick out of when MDs, nurses, physical therapists, people that are really grounded in an amazing conventional medical fields become my patient students. Then I know I'm onto something. I know they're good at what they do. It is not about the dark side and the light side is my point. When we do practice together as mutual patients, students, as doctors and teachers, and we dance together, that's where the best results come from, hand over hand, time after time.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is those people embracing the numinous part of the healing experience and the natural part of the healing experience. And for me, the Lotus Way, my faith-based organization that I'm the spiritual director of, our doctrine, our motto, if you will, love is our religion. Nature is God, is the goddess, is the divine, is the numinous, and our bodies are our temples. And so to acknowledge that numinous aspect the natural phenomena that we can't yet measure or explain, and allow that to become a part of, even as you're being rolled into an MRI machine, even as a surgeon is cutting into your body to sew up something or remove something or do something, to allow an aspect of the not phenomenal, numinous, natural part of the world that needs to come into play, and whatever that experience is, enhances all of our healing experiences, living experiences, and dying experiences.
Right.
And so that's what I do. I get to be, when called in, and you're calling me in to offer this right now because you wanted maybe your viewers to hear this around living vitally and dying vitally, whichever tools you're using. I love working with people who've been I don't love for them that they've been diagnosed with a scary cancer, but I love when they do call me in. I'm not saying don't go to your oncologist. I love it when an oncologist says, oh my gosh, bring Dr. Georgia in. Meditation, looking at your diet and lifestyle, looking at maybe some other complementary things that you can do that can decrease the side effects of the chemotherapy and increase the healing potential of the chemotherapy. She might have some things, and check with me of course first. And I love being a part of those teams for people. I love seeing how they have a more positive experience with their oncologist and with their chemotherapy, which, the quote that you read, nobody says, wow, this is a great day to go in for my third round of chemo where I'm going to lose my hair and puke all day and feel like shit for 3 days afterwards. But guess what? They love it a little more if they bring in healers that can help make that a more holistic experience, a more vital experience. That's my honor, blessing, and gift. It doesn't mean I get to save every life. It doesn't, I don't get to make every symptom go away for everybody, but time after time, I have a pretty good track record of making most people's experiences that work with me at least a little more enriched, beautiful, sweeter, more holistic. They feel more supported. They feel love infused into the experience. They feel an honoring of this numinous natural phenomena that goes into the dance of living and eventually dying vitally. And that's what I'm trained for. That's what I've spent decades studying for my own personal healing experiences. And then at some point I need to pass this on. I need to share this. So I studied more until I became a teacher, until I actually ended up a physician in that
Yeah.
stuff. And we can do it. We can make chemotherapy a more vital experience. We can make a broken leg a more vital experience. We can make losing a loved one, which we do. None of us want to lose the loved one. None of us are going, yay, you're dying now. That's never going to happen. But we can bring more vitality, more love, more beauty, more consciousness, more awareness, more supportedness, more understanding of the natural aspects of the processes that are going on into the experience. Every single experience. You cannot name one single tragic, scary, potentially death-facing experience that, if you have some practices, have some support, ideally practice them and support them before the emergency day. But even if it's just we're at death's door, we need help, who can we call in?
Right.
We can have teachers, physicians, practitioners, music, meditation practices, touch therapy practices, so many things to make those moments a little more understandable, embraceable, sacred, and even sometimes beautiful. It's possible.
So let me ask you this, and I go back to my original question of how is fearing disease, how does that change the way that we live if we have this idea that there is a possibility of becoming ill with some sort of disease, if we have some sort of tools in place knowing that we do live in a natural world where there are diseases that humans get. It's just kind of a part of the process. Um, does that make it less scary? And does that make it a little easier to live your day-to-day life, knowing that, there are tools that I can put in place if this happens to me?
I think so, Brandy. And I think if two things come up, the word fear and fearing disease. And so we can talk about fear, which is an emotion. And then we can talk about the word disease, which was my second point that I didn't get around to. So we can come back to it now, from your last question. So, and let's start with that one because I forgot it last time. So the word disease, how do we look at disease? The word disease I break down to dis-ease, right? And the opposite of disease is
Ease.
ease.
Right.
So one way to counteract an experience that is coming into our lives and being labeled as a dis-ease, and there's a long list of things that qualify as diseases, dis-eases, is to look at where we can bring in more ease. Now, in the death process, which is our main topic today, conventional medicine brings in morphine at the end. At the very end, in order to take someone whose dis-ease is, it's now looking like inevitably leading towards final breaths of life and death, one of the most common solutions to help bring more ease is morphine. It's understandable because we can't take away a person's on some level psychological suffering, but we can block out the pain. Now, morphine also blocks out a great deal of our ability to be psychologically aware and present. But it is still the conventional medicine's attempt to bring ease into a situation of major disease that is leading to death. So I'm using an extreme example. But there are other tools: meditation, beautiful music, massaging someone's feet, putting oil on their skin, and just touching them with a sweet caress. If they're able to see and hear, to whisper sweet, loving words to them as you hold their hand. These bring ease into that moment. And all of us, if we've had the challenge and blessing to be by a person's side as they pass away, our number one wish is to help bring ease to that moment.
Well, and also connection. I imagine that connection, you come into this world connected, to your mother, and you're put in your mother's arms, and there's that connection. And then, having, you're going to leave this world. I imagine that also that physical touch and connection would be something of an ease.
Yes, physical connection is vital.
Yeah.
It's vital. Right now in the world, we're having a lot less of it, and that's creating more dis-ease.
Right. We're
So
getting further and further and further away from each other, and people are dying alone. And, that's a whole other topic, but yeah, it makes me terribly sad.
yeah, and at the so we have to look at if we're not able to physically touch each other, what are the other ways we can connect? What are the other ways we can bring ease into times of dis-ease? So this then connects to the concept of fear of disease. So the concept of fear, a lot of people either are saying around certain diseases, right now, big ones on the horizon and in our faces every day, are people making their decisions out of fear? Well, fear is a natural emotion. So just like grief is a natural emotion, we talked about that a moment ago. So I can say the same thing about fear. It's okay to have a certain a level of fear. It's a protective emotion in nature. A little mouse scurrying around when a cat comes into a room, fear is what's like, and it's going to run and be safe. So we all have a certain aspect of fear that helps us make some decisions in a healthy way, where we have to be careful and hopefully, again, develop that awareness around our experiences to live vitally and die vitally, is if we're getting stuck in the emotion. Am I living every day in fear around or this is the interesting one, a disease I don't even have? And that has been real for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. We have a history of a certain type of cancer in a family. So now I carry around a potentially heightened level of fear around a disease that, even though I go in and get checked every year, I don't have that cancer. But I still have maybe a low grade, or some people a higher grade level of fear that I kind of hold on to because of, and in some ways, a very logical reason: potential predisposition, higher risk of a cancer. Then there's actually getting diagnosed with a cancer. Then there's actually which stage of the cancer and what they think your chances are of surviving that cancer, contributes to how much fear I wrap around a disease diagnosis. Again, the pathological part, the part that I come in when people say, gosh, what do we do about this really, fear of disease that I really either see in my life for whatever reasons, or I'm observing in the world, and it's kind of confusing, scary. How do I navigate this with my children? Because children in our world today are seen, for better and worse, a lot more of the world's stuff right now.
Mm-hmm.
How do I help my child navigate a world where disease is being discussed and presented everywhere?
It's in their faces every day, all day.
Literally. And so we are living in a world where we're raising a whole generation of children right now in a new world when it comes to having disease put, kids almost literally now don't get to go to school for any hours or go play or even sit at home or watch television without disease messaging around disease being presented, for better and worse. So how do we navigate the element, very naturally understandable element, both for us as adults and for children in the world right now, of fear of that concept of disease? It's more challenging now than ever. And then when it comes to death, how do we do it? Because that's our topic that we want to stick on, right? So when we're in the active state of dying, or approaching the potential of dying, or contemplating death or dying, and the natural aspect and emotion that will come up for any healthy human, there'll be a component of fear. This is one of my great psychology teachers taught me, is the only difference between a healthy emotion and an unhealthy reaction to an emotion is if that person is experiencing discomfort around that emotion. Meaning if you're getting stuck in it and unable to work with it and move through it, because it'd be unnatural to not be a little bit afraid of experiencing death. Most of us are going to try and avoid it. That's natural. But if I get so afraid that it is now debilitating me and I am not able to work with that emotion and at some point move through it and experience other emotions, because we need to constantly acknowledge that joy, fear, worry, anger, grieving, these emotions are natural, but we need to experience all of them, and none of them, if we get stuck in any one or two or three of them as a state that we're living all day in, it's not going to be healthy.
I was just going to say, how does that change your physiology being stuck in fear?
It's a great question. So from in medical systems like Ayurveda and other Asian medicines, Chinese medicine, we actually can see how different emotions have some very common correlations to different organ systems in our body and different diseases. In Chinese medicine, for example, fear is associated with the kidney channel, kidney and bladder channels, the water channels in our body. And that's not just the kidney organs, but certainly we're not going to get into, I'm not going to give you a Chinese medicine lesson right now, but basically when we get trapped in any emotion, it will affect different systems in our body differently. People who really are feeling stuck in anger and frustration a lot of time. Do you know any people like that
Oh,
you
yeah.
kind of, you literally
Quite a
kind
few.
of define them as, well, that person's kind of seems just angry all the time. Another person's worried all the time. It's not, worry and fear can be a little bit different. I'm, semantics here, but I'm worried about getting everything done all the time. Worried. Another person is just in fear, terror of something and resisting. Grieving,
Yeah.
right? A loved one dies and we just can't get out of the grieving stage. And I'm talking about, 2 years after the death, we're still living trapped sometimes in the grief. So when we get stuck in any of these predominant emotions, there will be a pathology. And in my medical systems, I can look at that and look at the health issues going in that person, and usually see a direct correlation between the emotions that seem to be predominant and potentially stagnant, stuck in, and what's going on in their organ systems and their health. So lungs, a lot of times grief is a big emotion with people with lung issues. A lot of times back pain, a certain type of back pain, is really dealing with suppressed fear, a deep, long-held suppressed fear. Anger, the muscles and the joints and the muscles in a person are just tense. They're just like locked up, so they can feel a lot of pain, physical pain in their body, and even in certain muscle systems more than others. So we see where these different emotions go and set up residence in the body and create dis-ease, different types of dis-eases.
It's interesting to me that the very thing that you fear is creating the very thing that you fear.
Yeah. And so a lot of times in my practices, I'm simply looking at helping people get unstuck in whatever pattern they might have gotten haphazardly stuck in for very understandable reasons. And said, hey, that anger served you for a little while. That fear served you for a little while. Grieving, natural, serves you for a while. Important to have that, whatever emotion. And now,
Right. And that's what I wanted to move into too, is the grief process. Okay. So we've talked about, coming to terms with our own mortality, or coming to terms with the fear around disease that could cause a death, or going through the death process. But what about after? What about those of us that are left behind? How do you then grieve that? How do you best accept somebody else's mortality, somebody that you were connected to, somebody whose energy was your energy, the loss of your child, the loss of your parent, whatever it is, this dear person is now not here. How do I move on? How do I get through that?
Anybody that doesn't have that question after losing a loved one is, not breathing anymore themselves. That's what every one of us has to face. How do I do that? That is a very individual question. And if I gave you a generic answer to that,
It wouldn't
important
be
question,
authentic. Yeah.
I would not be I would not be serving you or anybody listening to this, because I completely value each individual's unique experience with that. One of the most profound moments in our life, and many of us have many of those moments because we don't only have one person we love who dies before we die. So most of us will come to that point multiple times in our life when we lose loved ones. And the closer the loved one, the harder that question is to answer as an individual. And there are answers. There are multiple answers to your question. There are always things that each one of us can do. It will be different and look different and have a different length of time and involve different tools or books or professional healers. And the important thing, the one thing I can say about how is one thing. If you don't figure out how to do it on your own, that feels really good. And when I say good, I mean you're dealing with the grieving process after your loved one dies and saying, I understand these are my feelings. They're totally okay and healthy. There's nothing wrong with how I'm feeling. I'm going to do it this way. This is what works for me. I'm okay even though this sucks, and I'm good. I'm good with my grieving process. There aren't a lot of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of us sometime in that grieving process say, I need to pick up the phone and call my best friend or my, the therapist I've worked with for years, or I like homeopathy and I'm going to call my homeopathist, or there's a group that supports people who are grieving in a similar way for a similar type of death. Or there's an amazing book that, like, I'm just off the top of my head, one of my favorites, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, for some people was just a magical book to read when you're contemplating life and death. But there's a whole list of books. Or I need to, I heard about this beautiful practitioner, Dr. George, who helps people in this phase of their grieving process, and I'm going to pick up the phone and see if she can help me. Or I have a meditation practice, or I heard about a meditation practice that helps people through this. One of my dearest favorite people in the world, Dr. Andrea Dearhart, dedicates her entire practice, The Heart Way. Her website is theheartway.org. She has resources on there. She's a nonprofit organization. She has a million tools to help people in anything. I mean, it's full time what she does. And she's who I'm going to call if she's still alive when I'm experiencing death. And she certainly has been one of the first people I reach out to if and when I'm feeling like I need support outside of myself to move through a grieving process. And I support her organization in any way I can. And I often send people when I feel like it's kind of either beyond my scope of practice, or that someone needs a really just like someone who deals full time with this stuff. She's a person I refer people to. So again, we come back to that concept like we talked around with fear. If you're in the grieving process and you aren't feeling, and the word good is a little loaded, but you're not feeling like, okay, this is natural, what I'm going through, I'm okay. And at some point the grief starts subsiding, and you're starting to feel some joy and able to, you're moving through the grieving process. If at any point you're feeling stuck in it, if any point you're going, I can't get out of this, I'm not eating well, I'm not getting out in the sunshine, I'm not engaging socially in the ways that I know myself to be what for me is healthy and functional and normal. I'm not moving through this. I'm stuck in this emotion. There are tools. There are people. Start with, if you're listening to this and you feel stuck and don't know where else to reach, start with me. Call me. If I am not the right fit for you for a million reasons, time, I do things remotely and on like Zoom all the time or by phone, but if we realize we really need someone boots on the ground and in person in your life, we look for that. But the important thing in the grieving process is if and when you can have the level of awareness that I'm feeling stuck, I want to help get unstuck, start reaching out. There are tools, and there's tools that'll work for you, whether it has to do with within your religion or within your philosophical beliefs or within your geographic region or within your budget. There's a million variables. No matter what your variables, if you're stuck, there's support. And you've got to start reaching out and picking up a phone. And this is a thing that when people are in severe depression and grief, they have a hard time reaching out.
Right. And that's kind of one of those roadblocks that if you, I imagine, tend to get too deep into it or too stuck into it, that would be a step that would be very difficult to take.
So that's when, right now, at least as we come to, kind of wrapping up in conclusions, I offered one resource that's free that has, I think I even sent you at one time, her list of reading materials.
Yes, at the Heart Way.
Yeah, if a person who's really feeling stuck, not ready to reach out, but knows they're stuck and wants some help, go to theheartway.org. There's a list of resources. There's a list of books, videos, the lotusway.org, my website, should have, and if it doesn't, our Facebook page, the Lotus Way, has guided meditations that I offer people. There's, and Dr. Dearhart, the Heart Way, has yoga nidra specifically for death and dying. Beautiful, beautiful meditation practices that are specific to this topic. So there are things people can do without having to reach out and socially interact, whether it's books or, recorded guided meditations, to help them start healing around that feeling of being trapped in an emotion. And that's all we can do. That's all we can say to every single one of us. I've been there. I'm not great at asking for help. I love helping people, not as good at asking for help. And that's my lesson. We all sometimes need help, every single one of us, and especially around death and dying, especially around the emotions of fear and grief, which are two predominant emotions around death. They're natural. And if when we can realize that we might be stuck in them, find support to help us. But remember that the emotions are natural, but we need them to move. And when they aren't moving, when we feel stuck in them, that's when we do need help, every single one of us. That's when disease starts happening in our bodies. When we don't let an emotion move, we enter a state of dis-ease. Even joy, even happiness, if you're happy all the time, it will become a dis-ease. It's not natural.
So anything that's stagnant, your energy is stagnant, an emotion is stagnant, is going to, it's going to be a problem.
And in my medical systems, specific stagnant emotions at specific times of life for a specific person, you mix it with a certain environment, winter, summer, damp, dry, and then you're 15 years old and female and having your menstrual cycle and have had sexual abuse, and then someone dies. That perfect storm creates specific dis-ease. Okay, then you're a mom, otherwise vitally healthy, have a healthy child, then all of a sudden, overnight, that healthy child becomes sick. That mother, and it's summertime, and they're in the air conditioning all the time, and they're still having their periods, and they have they're a single mother, so they don't have support. So that person will have a perfect storm, and their dis-ease will look different.
It's really fascinating.
So this is where, I get to bring in a much more refined aspect of science to look at the emotions, fear, anger, depression, sadness, worry, whatever, grief, and dis-ease.
And it
and how.
feels very individualized. And I imagine that that would feel um, more, I don't know if the word is special because it, you know, it's not really a special experience, but kind of when someone is seeing you for your particular issues and your particular disease processes.
In each moment. And
Right.
you, Brandy, could come to me this week, and even though you know this week and 2 years from now or 2 years ago, even though you're still you and have, you know, decades of certain experiences, just what's going on right in that time adds another. And I always tell a lot of my patients, I'm like, okay, what 5,000 piece puzzle did you bring in for me to put together today? You know, lay it out on the table for me, show me what you've worked out so far, and then show me what I can't figure this part out. And I, you know, get to kind of sit there and help people work their puzzle.
Yeah.
And we are all a unique puzzle, and today my puzzle's a little different than it is next week, right? But today and tomorrow my puzzle's pretty much the same. And like, you know, depending, some people it just changes overnight. Other people have about 10 years of about the same stuff they're dealing with, but then they get hit out of nowhere with a death and their whole dis-ease picture changes. Something pops up that never happened before. Other people, things slowly creep into their picture.
Right.
Death comes to all of us, whether it's through loved ones. And right now in the world, we're being individually affected by watching death on the big screen in a way we've never watched it before. I don't care what your personal beliefs are around what's going on in the world. Every single one of us is dealing with dis-ease and emotions differently than we have ever before in the world. And if we don't look and reflect on how it's affecting how we're living, vitally or otherwise, then that is what will contribute to our own diseases. It's just that's how nature works. That's the laws of physics. And so death is at our doorstep all the time, and death is in our faces, and disease is in our faces in new ways in the world. And we can choose to look at that as an opportunity to grow and heal and look at our resources of navigating. And basically, mostly what we have to check in is, am I getting stuck in an emotion around either a disease I'm having or what I'm watching in the world with disease? Am I getting stuck in any of the emotions? Because if I'm getting in a state of fear all the time, I don't care how scary it is. I don't want to say I don't care how scary it is. That's a bad way to say it. It's understandable to be more afraid right now in the world. However, if whatever's happening in the world, I'm not able to move through all the emotions, I get stuck in emotion, it is not going to serve me well, because no emotion should we be living in all the time. So if you're feeling fear all the time right now, whether you are actually sick or worried about getting sick or empathetic because so many other people are getting sick, healthy emotion. However, we still need to figure out how to deal with it before it becomes pathological and does create some type of dis-ease in you.
Wow. I think that's a really good exclamation point to wrap up on, and gives a lot of people a lot of things to think about.
It does. And I hope hopefully the ending on a positive message is, no matter what anybody is going through right now, no matter how weird and crazy the world is, and whatever you're navigating in your own personal lives around disease and or death, there are tools to help us have a more vital perspective and bring more ease into our lives around this extraordinarily challenging time in our whole global world and in our individual lives. And I hope everybody finds resources for that. And if I can be a resource, it's what I literally live to do.
You're so good at it. I adore you. And I want to thank you so much for having this conversation. I know it's not an easy conversation to have, and it's probably not an easy conversation for people to listen to, but I hope that those that did listen got something from it, and that if they do need to reach out, that they either reach out to you or use any of the resources that you just shared. So I'm internally grateful. Thank you so much.
Well, Brandy, you're welcome, and thank you. And obviously there are a ton more resources. We can't talk about all of them, but everybody needs help. We all need each other, and we all can get through this time in the world and whatever each of us are going through individually with a little more ease and grace. And so that is my wish. And I always want to honor my teachers, my healers who've helped me get to this place where hopefully I'm dealing with things with a little more ease than I would have without them, and pay it forward in any way I can.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. George.